Rain had been falling on the northern ridge of Viridia 3 for 2 straight days. When Daniel Hale finally climbed out of his truck and pulled his collar up against the wind, he was 34 years old. Lean, quiet, and tired, he worked alone. The forest had been his job and his home for almost a decade, and he knew every creek bed and every animal trail on his patrol route. What he did not know was why the trees ahead of him were bent outward like someone had punched the sky open above them. He walked forward with one hand on his sidearm. The ground under his boots was soft and warm, which was wrong because the rain had been cold all morning. Steam rose through the pine needles. Somewhere up ahead, a faint light pulsed through the mist, blue and then gold and then blue again. Daniel pushed through a line of broken branches and stopped at the edge of a crater. It was wide, maybe 30 ft across. The dirt inside was black and glassy, pieces of twisted metal stuck out of the walls. And Daniel understood at once that something had come down hard and fast. Something not from any ship registered on this colony. He had patrolled a crash site before years ago when a mining shuttle went down near the river. That wreck had been loud and ugly. This one was small, clean, and silent. He slid down the side of the crater, boots sinking into the warm soil. The metal pieces were unfamiliar. They had strange patterns etched into them, curves that did not belong to any human factory. He was about to turn back and call it in when he heard a sound, a small, wet, shaky breath. Daniel froze. He listened again. There it was, a tiny rasp like a kitten trying to cry, then a second one, softer, weaker. He followed the sound to the far wall of the crater where a chunk of metal had curled around something. He knelt down and used his knife to pry the piece open. Inside, the hollow, pressed together in a ball, were 2 small creatures. They were dragons, or something very close. Each one was no bigger than a house cat. Their bodies were covered in tiny, overlapping scales. The first was a deep smoke gray with silver lines running along its back, and it had eyes like polished metal. The second was smaller, paler, with scales the color of a winter sunrise and eyes like melted gold. Both of them glowed faintly from inside, as if a soft light was moving under their skin. Both of them were shivering. Daniel held his breath. He had grown up on stories about aliens. He had seen official pictures of non-human species from other worlds. He had never seen anything like this, and he had never heard of 2 creatures that glowed on their own and looked at a human with eyes that seemed to understand. The gray one lifted its head. It made a small sound, almost a question. Daniel did not move. He slowly set his knife down on the dirt. "Hey," he said quietly. "Hey there, it's all right." The gray one pushed itself forward on trembling legs and nosed the fabric of his glove. The pale one followed, slower, weaker, and pressed its small body against his wrist. They were cold. They were too cold. Daniel did not think. He unzipped his field jacket, picked them up carefully, one in each hand, and tucked them inside against his shirt. The warmth of his chest seemed to settle them. The gray one gave a small sigh. The pale one closed its golden eyes. He climbed out of the crater with both of them pressed against his ribs. The walk back to the truck took 20 minutes. He did not see another living thing in the forest, which was also wrong. Deer should have been moving. Birds should have been calling. The silence told him the local animals had felt whatever came down and wanted nothing to do with it. He drove home on muddy back roads, one hand on the wheel and one hand inside, his jacket steadying the two small bodies. By the time he reached his cabin, the rain had stopped and a weak sun was trying to push through the clouds. Daniel carried them inside and set them down on the old wool blanket on his couch. He lit the fire. He warmed a bowl of water and added a little sugar, remembering something his grandfather had done for orphaned animals. The gray one sniffed the water and drank. The pale one needed help, and Daniel used a spoon to dribble the mixture into its tiny mouth. After a few minutes, color came back into its scales and the inner glow grew stronger. He sat back on the floor and watched them for a long time. They watched him back. He thought about his comm unit on the kitchen table. He thought about the Colonial Wildlife Bureau and the forms he was supposed to fill out. He thought about the fact that these were not animals. Animals did not look at a man the way these two were looking at him. Animals did not crash out of the sky inside a strange metal shell. He reached for the comm. The gray one made a soft, sharp sound. Not angry, afraid. Daniel's hand stopped in midair. The pale one pressed closer to its sibling and began to hum. The sound filled the room in a way that did not feel like noise. It felt like a hand on his shoulder. It felt like please. Daniel pulled his hand back. Okay, he whispered. Okay, not tonight. He lay down on the floor beside the couch because he did not want to leave them alone. Both hatchlings crawled off the blanket and curled against his chest, one on each side, their small glows beating like quiet hearts. High above Viridia 3 in the cold dark of orbit, a long black ship noted the flare of unusual energy in the forest and began to turn. 3 days passed before Daniel Hale gave them names. He had spent the first 2 days not sleeping much, watching them breathe, watching them eat, watching them watch him. The smaller pale one tired easily and would curl up in his lap for long stretches of time. The gray one with silver eyes was bolder. It climbed the bookshelf. It tried to eat a candle. It bit the corner of his kitchen table and then looked at him with an expression that could only be called guilty. On the morning of the 3rd day, Daniel poured himself a coffee, sat down on the floor and looked at the two of them side by side on the rug. Sable, he said, pointing at the gray one. The name felt right. Smoke and shadow. The gray one tilted its head. Coral, he said, pointing at the pale one. The pale one gave a tiny chirp and pressed its forehead against his knee. Something happened in Daniel's mind when he said the names, a flash of warmth, feeling almost like 2 quiet voices agreeing. He did not know what to call it, so he drank his coffee and pretended it was just his tired brain playing tricks. That afternoon, he tried to call the Colonial Wildlife Bureau again. He picked up the comm unit, tapped in the first 3 digits of the code, and stopped. Sable's scales had dimmed. The little dragon was standing in the doorway of the kitchen staring at him, and the light under its skin was fading. By the second, Coral curled on the couch, lifted its head and made a small, frightened sound. Daniel put the comm down. The scales brightened again. He picked the comm up. They dimmed again. He set it down very slowly and sat on the kitchen floor with his back against the cabinet. He did not understand how they knew. He was almost certain they could not read the buttons, but they Felt something, they felt the intent. Behind the action, and the intent scared them. "All right," he said softly, "all right. I hear you." Over the next 2 days, he tested the edges of this new arrangement. When he walked out to his truck, both hatchlings followed. When he went to the shower, they sat outside the bathroom door and whined. When he climbed onto his roof to check a loose shingle, Sable climbed up after him using the drain pipe. Coral sat in the grass below and hummed in distress until Daniel came back down. Wherever he went, they went. Whatever he felt, they seemed to feel too. He started sleeping on the couch because they would not settle in any other room. On the 4th night, Daniel had a dream. He was walking through a field of tall, silver grass under 2 moons, and the grass was singing. The song had no words, but it had meaning. It said safe. It said found. It said home. He woke up with tears on his face and 2 small, warm bodies pressed against his chest, both glowing in perfect rhythm with his heartbeat. The dreams continued every night after that. On the 6th day, Daniel's neighbor came by. Her name was Martha Green, and she owned the next property over, about 2 miles down the road. She was 70 years old, tough as pine, and she dropped off fresh eggs every week. Daniel met her on the porch before she could come inside. "You look terrible," Martha said. "Didn't sleep well." She squinted at him. "Daniel, what's that light coming from your window?" He had forgotten to close the curtains. Martha walked past him and stepped into the cabin before he could stop her. Sable was on the couch. Coral was on the bookshelf. Both of them froze when they saw her. Martha also froze. "Oh my," she said. Coral began to hum, a low warning sound. Martha took a cautious step forward and reached out a hand. The humming grew sharper. Daniel moved to stop her, but before he could, a soft pulse of pale light flashed from Coral's small body. It did not hurt, it did not burn, it just pushed. Martha stumbled back 2 steps and sat down hard on the rug. Daniel rushed to help her up. She was not injured, only surprised. I'm fine," she muttered, waving him off. Sable was now standing between Martha and Coral with its scales bristled up. Martha stared at Daniel. "Son, where did you get them?" "Crater, Northern Ridge, 6 days ago. Colonial authorities. They do not want me to cause." "They?" Daniel nodded toward the hatchlings. Martha looked at Coral, then at Sable, then back at Daniel, and for a long moment she said nothing. Finally she sighed. "My husband was a xenobiologist before he passed. He worked on 3 different colony worlds. He used to say that the day we meet a creature that chooses us, we better be ready to choose back." She stood up and brushed off her pants. "They chose you, Daniel. Anyone with eyes can see that. I do not know what to do. Feed them, keep them warm, keep them hidden, and figure out what they are before someone else does." She let herself out. Daniel locked the door. He drew the curtains. He sat on the couch with both hatchlings on his lap. Sable climbed up his chest and touched its forehead too. His Coral pressed against his neck. That night the dream came again, but this time there was a shadow in it. Something long and black moving through the silver grass, something hunting. Daniel woke up in the dark. Both hatchlings were awake too. Both were staring at the window. Far above Viridia 3, a long black ship finished its slow turn and began to burn its engines toward the surface. The shuttle came down at sunset. Daniel Hale was splitting wood behind the cabin when he heard it. The sound was wrong for any aircraft he knew. No rotors, no jet wash, just a deep pressure in the air, the kind of silence that came before a thunderstorm. He set the axe down and turned toward the meadow. Sable and Coral had already stopped playing in the grass. They stood very still side by side, scales dimmed so low they were almost dark. Their eyes were fixed on the sky. A black shape slid out of the clouds. The craft was long and narrow, shaped like a sharpened leaf, with no visible engines and no markings. It settled onto the meadow without bending a single blade of grass. A seam opened along its side and 3 figures stepped out. They were tall. Daniel guessed 7 ft. Easily. Their skin was a deep purplish gray, smooth like river stones, and their faces had no noses that he could see, only narrow slits above a thin mouth. 2 dark eyes sat high on each forehead. They wore heavy robes of layered black fabric, and each one carried a short rod that hummed with faint energy. The one in front walked forward. Its steps were long and quiet. Human, it said. The voice came from a small device at its throat. The word was flat and careful. You will surrender what does not belong to you. Daniel took a slow breath. He kept his hands visible. Who are you? I am called Orin. I speak for the Thessari conquered. The 2 offspring behind you are property of our empire. They were stolen. The vessel that carried them crashed on this world. You have taken them into shelter. We are here to correct this. Behind Daniel, Coral pressed hard against his leg. Sable had moved halfway in front of him, wings half raised, teeth showing. Correct how? Daniel asked. We will remove them. They will be returned to the bonding sanctum. You will not be punished if you cooperate. Daniel looked at the rod in Orin's hand. He looked at the other 2 aliens behind him, both watching the hatchlings with cold focus. He thought about his rifle. Inside the cabin, he thought about Martha's words. He thought about the dream with the black shape hunting through silver grass. I need more information, Daniel said. Where was their ship coming from? Who were the smugglers? What exactly is a bonding sanctum? Orin tilted his head. The gesture was not friendly. You do not require that knowledge. You are a caretaker by accident, not by right. The offspring are not pets. They are sacred and they are ours. They don't act like your property. Orin's 2 eyes narrowed. For the first time, Daniel saw something that looked like emotion in the alien's face. It was not a good emotion. They are young. They do not yet understand who they belong to. That is why they must be returned quickly. Each day away from the sanctum weakens the bonding cycle. If we delay further, they will be unusable. That last word hit Daniel wrong. Unusable. Unusable for what? He asked. Orin did not answer. Daniel felt Coral begin to shake against his leg. Sable made a low sound he had never heard before, somewhere between a hiss and a cry. Daniel understood, without needing to ask again, that this was not a rescue. These creatures were terrified. He kept his voice calm. I'm not refusing, but I need time. They are weak. Moving them now could kill them. Give me 1 day. I will prepare them. I will meet you here same time tomorrow. Orin studied him for a long moment. 12 hours, Orin said, not 1 minute. More if you attempt to flee our ship. In orbit will track you. If you attempt to hide them, we will burn this forest. To Ash, do you understand, human? I understand. Orin turned without another word. 3 Thessari walked back into the leaf-shaped craft. The seam closed. Ship lifted straight up without a sound and vanished into the evening sky. Daniel stood in the meadow for a long time. His hands were shaking. He carried both hatchlings inside. Coral was crying, making a thin, broken sound. Sable would not stop growling. Daniel sat on the floor and held them until they calmed down. Coral pressed its golden eye against the hollow of his throat, and the fear coming off the tiny body felt like a cold wind under his skin. You're not going with them, Daniel said. I don't know what a bonding sanctum is, but you're not going. Sable lifted its head and stared at him. For one strange second, Daniel felt something push gently into his mind. Single word without sound. Think. He almost dropped the hatchling. Daniel sat very still and breathed. The word was gone, but the feeling of it remained warm in the center of his chest, like a small flame someone had handed to him to keep. He got up. He walked to his desk in the corner of the cabin. He pulled the dust cover off his old colonial database terminal, the one he had not used in 5 years, and powered it on. The screen flickered and came to life. He typed in his Ranger access code. He opened the species registry. He typed one word into the search bar. Thessari. The screen loaded. A file appeared. Most of it was grayed out, classified above his clearance, but the summary line at the top was readable. THSSRI conquered, known hostile. Caution, active breeding programs using captured juvenile life forms, do not engage. Daniel scrolled down. The next line made him go very cold. Offspring that refuse bonding are terminated. Survival rate of candidates below 4%. He read it again. He read it a third time. Then he stood up, walked to the cabinet by the door, and took out his grandfather's old hunting rifle. Daniel Hale did not sleep that night. He sat at the old colonial terminal with a cup of cold coffee and read every fragment of data his clearance would let him see. What he could not read, he tried to guess from what he could. Thessari conquered was old, older than most spacefaring species in this part of the galaxy. They had risen on a hot, dry world far from human space, and they had built their entire empire on one thing: the bonding of warrior hosts to living weapons. Those living weapons were small, dragon-like creatures born on a remote breeding world, each one capable of producing energy fields, light pulses, and eventually, when fully grown, plasma fire strong enough to burn through armor. The creatures were not naturally violent. The Thessari made them violent. They took the hatchlings from their birth mothers within hours of hatching. They placed each one into a stone chamber called a bonding sanctum. Inside that chamber, a Thessari soldier stood and waited. The hatchling was starved. For days it was given one choice: bond with the soldier in front of it, accept the chains of service for life, or die. Most died. The ones who bonded served until they were old. They were used in wars. They were used to burn other colonies. They were used as living shields. Daniel put his hands over his face. He looked across the room at the couch, where Sable and Coral lay curled together. Both hatchlings were awake, watching him. They had been watching him for hours. Their glow was steady and calm, but their silver and gold eyes were wide. He got up from the desk and knelt beside The couch. I understand now, he said quietly. I'm sorry, I understand. Coral reached out one tiny clawed hand and touched his cheek. Daniel closed his eyes. He thought about the crash. The crumpled metal in the crater had been a small escape pod, not a smuggler ship. Someone had pulled these two out of the sanctum before the ritual could start. Someone had put them inside that pod and fired it toward the nearest habitable world, not knowing if anyone would ever find them. That person, whoever they were, had probably died trying, and the hatchlings had landed on Viridia 3 in his forest on his patrol route. Sable crawled up onto his shoulder and pressed its small head against his jaw. You chose me, Daniel whispered. That's what you did, isn't it? You chose me before any of them could put you in a stone room. Sable made a soft sound of agreement. Daniel stayed there on the rug for a long time. Outside, the sky began to turn from black to gray. Dawn was coming. His 12 hours were almost up. He stood up and checked the rifle. It was an old model bolt action, a gift from his grandfather when he turned 16. It had taken down deer and once a sick mountain cat. It had never been pointed at anything that could think. He loaded it anyway. He pulled on his heavy coat. He checked the spare magazines in his pocket. He looked around the cabin at the life he had built, the shelves of books, the worn blue rug, the picture of his parents on the mantel. He knew this place might not survive the morning. He did not care. A soft chime came from the window. It was almost 6:00 in the morning. The sun had not yet cleared the trees. Far off in the meadow, Daniel heard the precious silence that meant a Thessari shuttle was landing. He picked up Sable and Coral, one under each arm. Stay behind me, he said. No matter what happens, stay behind me. Coral pressed its forehead to his shoulder. Sable looked him dead in the eye and did something the hatchling had never done. Before it spoke, a single word formed. With effort, rough and raw but clear. Yes, sir. Daniel stared. He had no time to react. He walked out onto the porch. Oren stood in the meadow. Beside him were two larger Thessari in full combat armor, each holding a weapon that was not a scanning rod. These were rifles, long and dark with glowing coils running along the barrels. The shuttle sat open behind them. Human, Oren called. Step down, place the offspring on the ground. Step back 10 paces. Daniel walked down the porch steps. He stopped in the wet grass, about 20 feet from the 3 Thessari. No, he said. Oren's face went flat. I beg your pardon. I read your files, not all of them. Enough. Daniel kept his voice level. He could feel both hatchlings shaking against his chest. These two did not run from a smuggler. They ran from you. Someone loaded them into that pod to get them away from your sanctum. I don't know who did it, but I know why. Oren made a sharp clicking sound. 2 armored soldiers raised their weapons. You are speaking of things you do not comprehend, Oren said. The bonding is sacred. It is our way. These creatures exist for this purpose. They exist, Daniel said, because they were born, not because you decided they should serve. Human law does not apply here. Your own law does. You said it yourself. Bonded pairs cannot be separated. Daniel lifted his chin. These two have already bonded 9 days ago with me. Silence fell across the meadow. Oren's eyes widened for the first time. The alien looked truly shaken. Then his face hardened into something cold and final. "That is impossible," Orin whispered. "And it is an abomination." He lifted his hand. The armored soldiers leveled their rifles. Daniel felt Sable's small body tense against his ribs. The world went white. The first plasma bolt never touched him. It should have. The armored Thessarion. The left had a clean line of sight and had fired first, aiming for Daniel Hale's chest, but before the bolt could close the distance, a dome of pale light flared out from under Daniel's coat. Sable and Coral had pressed tight against his ribs at the exact same moment, and their small bodies had gone white-hot with effort. The bolt hit the dome, flashed green, and scattered into harmless sparks. Daniel did not wait to understand what had just happened. He dropped to one knee behind the corner of his porch railing, pulled the hatchlings out of his coat, and set them down against the wood. Both of them were panting. Their scales were dim now. Whatever that shield had cost, it had cost them a lot. "Stay low," Daniel said. He lifted the rifle. The second armored Thessari was moving around the side of the meadow, trying to flank him. Daniel breathed out slow, the way his grandfather had taught him, and squeezed the trigger. The old bolt action kicked against his shoulder. The round went through the gap in the armored neckpiece where the helmet met the chest plate. The alien dropped hard into the wet grass and did not get up. Orin shouted something in his own language. The remaining armored soldier began firing in bursts, plasma bolts tearing chunks out of the porch, the wall, the window frame above Daniel's head. Splinters of wood flew everywhere. Daniel ducked back, crawled along the porch, and came up on the other side of the steps. Coral was crying, a thin, broken sound. Daniel fired again. He missed. He worked. The bolt fired again. The second round punched through the armored Thessari's thigh. The alien staggered, dropped to one knee, and kept firing. A plasma bolt hit the porch pillar 2 inches from Daniel's face. The wood caught fire. He rolled off the porch into the grass and came up running. He scooped up Sable and Coral without slowing down and broke for the tree line. Behind him, Orin was shouting into a wrist device. Daniel could not understand the words, but he understood the tone. Orin was calling for the ship. The ship in orbit, the bigger one. Daniel reached the trees. He did not stop. He ran through the pines with both hatchlings pressed against his chest, branches whipping his face, roots nearly tripping him in the dim morning light. He knew these woods. He knew where to go. 2 miles north, there was an abandoned radio tower. It had been built 40 years ago when the colony was young, back when they had needed high-power relays to talk to the capital. It had not been used since the satellite network replaced it. But the tower still stood, and the transmitter at the base still had power. Daniel knew because he had checked it on patrol only 2 months ago, out of habit. He reached the clearing around the tower just as the sound hit him. A deep, heavy rumble rolling across the sky. He looked up. A Thessari warship was descending through the clouds. It was not a shuttle. It was the size of a small town. Its shape was angular and black, and it blotted out the rising sun. Daniel could see gun ports opening along its underside. He ran to the base of the tower and kicked open the old metal door. Inside, the control panel was still dark. He hit the power switch. Nothing. He hit it again. An orange light came on. Transmitter hummed to life. Sable crawled up onto his shoulder. Coral stayed clutched against his chest. Too tired to climb. Daniel grabbed the old handset. He punched the emergency broadcast code his grandfather had made him memorize when he was 12. Every human channel in rain would catch it, every ship, every colony, every outpost within 100 light seconds. He keyed the mic. This is Daniel Hale, Forest Ranger. Viridia 3 Northern District. His voice was steady because if it was not, no one would listen. I am under attack by Thessari forces. A warship is preparing to fire on a civilian colony world. They are here to recover 2 juvenile creatures that escaped their breeding program. I am telling anyone who can hear me, those creatures are children. Not weapons, not property, children. The Thessari starve them, cage them, and kill them if they refuse to bond as slaves. I have the 2 survivors with me. I will not give them up. I repeat, this is a civilian world. The Thessari are preparing to fire. Please, if anyone can hear me, please. He let go of the key. Static crackled back at him. Outside, the warship's shadow had swallowed the whole clearing. Through the doorway, Daniel could see the black underside of the ship, not 300 meters above the trees. He could hear the rising hum of its main batteries charging. Sable made a small sound. Daniel looked at the hatchling. Silver eyes met his. I know, Daniel whispered. I'm sorry. The transmitter chirped. A voice came through, human, female. Crisp and tight and very calm. Ranger Hale, this is the UCS Longbow. Captain Ruth Calder speaking. We received your signal. Hold your position. Keep your head down. Help is on the way. Daniel sagged against the wall. His legs almost gave out. Copy, he managed. Ranger, listen carefully. Do not leave that tower. Do not engage. The Thessari warship is charging weapons, but it will not fire in the next 90 seconds. Trust me. How do you know? Because we already locked targeting on it from 3 different angles 4 minutes ago, and they just noticed. Daniel blinked. Outside the tower, above the trees, the charging hum suddenly stopped. He stumbled to the doorway and looked up. The Thessari warship had gone still. Its gun ports were closing on the horizon, breaking through the low clouds. From 3 different directions, 3 long gray shapes were sliding into position. Human cruisers, each one bristled with weapons. Each one was larger than the Thessari ship. Sable gave a tired little chirp against his ear. Daniel started to laugh. He did not know why. He just stood there in the broken doorway of an old radio tower with 2 small glowing creatures pressed against him, and he laughed until his eyes were wet. Captain Ruth Calder's voice came back over the old transmitter while Daniel Hale was still trying to stop laughing. Ranger, I need you to stay calm and stay still. I'm opening a direct channel to the Thessari warship. I want you to listen. You earned it. The radio clicked. A new signal patched in. Calder's voice changed. It became slower, heavier, and colder. Daniel had heard voices like that before in old recordings from the early colonial wars. The voice of someone who had already decided how a conversation was going to end. Thessari vessel, this is the United Colonial Ship Longbow acting as senior command for Task Group 7. You are in violation of human sovereign space. You have opened fire on a registered civilian of the Viridia colony. You have Deployed armed ground troops without clearance. You have 1 minute to power down your weapons, retract your landing parties and leave orbit. Failure to comply will result in the immediate destruction of your vessel. There was a long pause. Then a Thessari voice answered, speaking through a translator. Daniel recognized Oren's flat tone. The alien was still down here on the ground somewhere, but he was patched into his own ship. Human captain, the offspring in the forest are property of the Thessari. Conquered, they were taken from our breeding world. Under our treaties with neighboring species, we have the right to recover them. We are not engaged in hostile action. We are exercising lawful recovery. Your interference will be considered a formal act of war. Calder did not even pause. We have reviewed your treaties. None of them are with humans. Our law does not recognize sentient offspring as property. The creatures on the ground are now under the protection of the colonial accord. Any further attempt to retrieve them will be considered kidnapping. Any further attempt to fire on our ranger will be considered murder. Any further attempt to bring your warship into atmosphere over a civilian population will be considered an act of orbital bombardment against a peaceful world. Do you understand me, Thessari? Another long pause. You will regret this, Oren said. His voice had lost its edge. He sounded like a man who had just realized he had miscalculated something important. I doubt it, Calder said. 30 seconds. Daniel held his breath. Sable and coral pressed hard against his chest. 20 seconds passed. 10. 5. Then with a deep rumble that Daniel felt through the soles of his boots, the Thessari warship began to rise. It pulled back into the clouds. Its gun ports were sealed. Its running lights had dimmed. In the meadow somewhere far behind him, Daniel could hear the leaf-shaped shuttle lifting off too. Oren was leaving. The armored soldier who had been firing at him was either being recovered or left behind. In less than 2 minutes, every Thessari signature on the scopes was gone. Daniel walked out of the tower on shaky legs. He sat down in the wet grass. Sable climbed down off his shoulder and flopped into his lap. Coral stayed pressed against his chest, breathing small, quick breaths. The sun was fully up now. Birds had started to call again. In the trees, Captain Calder's voice returned, softer. This time, Ranger Hale, we have a medical team and a xenospecies response unit inbound too. Your coordinates, ETA 20 minutes, please. Do not move. Is your patient stable? Daniel looked down at the two hatchlings. Coral's golden eyes were half closed, but the pale dragon was purring now, a tiny vibrating sound like a cat. Sable was already asleep, belly up. One wing flopped over Daniel's wrist. They're stable, Daniel said. His voice was rough. They're okay. I think we're all okay. Copy that, Ranger. Sit tight. We will come to you. He said. The weeks that followed blurred together. A human medical team examined both hatchlings and confirmed that they were healthy and growing. A xenospecies team confirmed Daniel's reading of the Thessari files and then some. It turned out the Thessari had been running their breeding program for almost 800 years and had killed millions of hatchlings who would not bond to a soldier. The news reached every human colony within days. Diplomatic ties were severed. 2 neighboring species who had quietly traded with the Thessari also cut ties. After seeing the evidence, the Thesauri, conquered which had seemed so large and so old, suddenly found itself very alone. A colonial council hearing was held on Viridia 3. Daniel sat at a wooden table in a small room while serious people in uniforms asked him serious questions. At the end, they voted unanimously to grant Sable and Coral permanent sanctuary on the colony and to name Daniel Hale their legal guardian. He signed the papers with Sable curled around his neck and Coral sitting on top of the document like a very small paperweight. Spring turned into summer. Hatchlings grew. By the time the first snow came again, Sable was the size of a large dog and Coral was not far behind. Their scales were brighter, their glow was stronger. Sable could speak now. Slowly in rough but real words, Coral preferred to hum, and the humming had meanings Daniel understood without needing translation. Martha Green still came by every week. With eggs, she had stopped being surprised by anything. On a cold, clear evening in December, Daniel sat on his porch and watched the two young dragons chase each other. Through the snow, Sable leapt, Coral tackled, they rolled across the yard in a ball of scales and soft light. When they tired, they came back to the porch and draped themselves across his legs, one on each side. Daniel scratched behind Sable's ears. Sable made a happy rumble. Coral pressed a warm golden cheek against his hand. Somewhere out past the stars, empires had plans. Somewhere out past the stars, the Thesauri were probably still making weapons, but here on a quiet porch on a quiet colony world, two small creatures who had been born to be slaves had found a forest, a cabin, and a man who had chosen them back. That Daniel thought was enough. That was everything.